Hi, welcome to the podcast about membrane structure and function. Membranes are really important because not only do they make up the outer cellular membrane of all living things, but they also create the membranes that are found inside of our cell in our organelles. So this podcast is going to help us to explain the different components of the cell membrane and how the components allow the membrane to function as a whole. First off, our membrane is made out of phospholipids. This is a special kind of molecule that has really unique properties that help the membrane function. It's made out of three parts. This upper portion contains a phosphate group. Then we have a glycerol molecule and two fatty acid chains. The portion on the left here is what we call the polar region. All of those oxygens and those charges give it a positive and negative charge. The fatty acid tails are nonpolar. All of those hydrogens and carbons do not carry any sort of charge. So oftentimes we will look at a phospholipid like this. That polar region is considered the hydrophilic head because it likes water. It's able to dissolve in water. The fatty acid tails are hydrophobic. They don't like water. So when you put a phospholipid in water, the tails will float upwards towards the air while the heads mix with the water really nicely. And so we can form this little layer of phospholipids along the surface of our liquids. But if that surface gets disrupted and those phospholipids sink down, what they'll do is they'll automatically form little bubbles where the hydrophobic tails point inwards, the hydrophobic heads point outwards. Now, if those bubbles start to come together, we can create a sheet of a double layer or a bilayer of these phospholipids. Those sheets can fold over on themselves and create a three-dimensional sphere that has an inner portion here that is a different environment than the outer portion. And that is the basis for our cellular membrane and also other membranes in all of our organelles in the eukaryotic cell. These membranes are really important because they create a physical barrier where the outer portion of the cell is different than the inner portion of the cell. We can create that physical barrier to create different environments in or out of the cell, and that becomes really important for different reactions and things. The reason it is able to create this physical barrier is because of these membranes, because of the phospholipid tails that are hydrophobic. Okay, that physical barrier. Now, some of the materials can move freely because they are small and nonpolar, just like the nonpolar region of the inner part of the membrane. While some particles that are too large or have a charge cannot get through that middle portion that is hydrophobic. So we call our membrane semi-permeable. Some stuff can get in and out and some stuff can't. But we need a way for these larger molecules or these charged molecules to get through. So we have proteins that are embedded in the membrane, and these proteins are really cool because they have different regions of different properties. For example, the regions, any part that's going to touch water, so up here, down here, even the inner surface of this channel are going to be hydrophilic, where any of the regions here that are touching the tails are going to be hydrophobic. And those properties are going to come from the amino acid sequences, whether they are hydrophilic or hydrophobic amino acids, and the way the protein is folded. Now, these embedded proteins can come in a lot of shapes and sizes, and a lot of them allow some materials to be transported into or out of the cells like little channels. Some of them are even carrier proteins. They change shape to allow things to come in and out. So the membrane's second really important function beyond just being a physical barrier is allowing the transportation of materials into and out of cells. And a lot of that has to do with those embedded membrane proteins. We can also take really big materials like entire cells or big food chunks into the cell or remove them from the cell via a process called endo or exocytosis. This is where the membrane is actually changing shape and allowing the cell to engulf or spit out materials. Let's take a closer look at the cell membrane to see how this actually works. The phospholipids have weak bonds, both hydrophilic connections between the heads and hydrophobic connections between the tails. But these connections are weak, so it allows our phospholipids to actually spin and rotate in place And it allows phospholipids to change places within the membrane. And that allows the membrane to be really, really fluid. Now, we also have these really important cholesterol molecules, which have, again, two regions, a hydrophilic region and a hydrophobic region. These are a form of lipid that fit in between the phospholipids, and they allow for the membrane to maintain its functionality at different temperatures. For example, at high temperatures, the molecules are moving faster and faster. The membrane could get really, really fluid and be actually too fluid, too moving. And so the cholesterol molecules help to stabilize at high temperatures by creating additional connections between the phospholipids around them. While at low temperatures, these fats could actually solidify. Think about cold butter or things like that. Whereas in cold situations, our cholesterol molecules are really helpful because they spread the molecules of the phospholipids apart so that it can maintain its fluidity at really cold temperatures. So really, really important here to maintain the fluidity of that membrane. Our cell membrane can also function to help with communication. So we can have a signal molecule and the receptor protein here embedded in the membrane, and now the signal is sent into the cell. So really important with cellular communication. We also have cells that can recognize each other. So here's a recognition protein. Here's a glycoprotein. This is a chain of a short carbohydrate, 20 to 25 monosaccharides stuck together, and they have different shapes, and they can actually help the two cells recognize each other. Our next function, we have a ton of different membrane-embedded enzymes that help to actually catalyze reactions, so taking substrates and forming products. And so reaction catalysis is really, really important. This occurs a lot in like the inner membrane of our mitochondria or chloroplasts. We can also have attachment. So between two different cells, we can have proteins that are going to help to fix the cells together. Or we can actually have our proteins being anchor points for the extracellular matrix or the cytoskeleton within our cell. So attachment is also really, really important. So I hope that you learned a little bit about each of the components, phospholipids, membrane proteins, carbohydrates, and cholesterol, and how they allow the overall cell to function with its different properties.